Hello everyone, and welcome to my session on Power BI governance of this 2020 edition of SQL Bits. My name is Ásgeir Gunnarsson, and for the next 20 minutes I want to talk to you about Power BI governance from a little bit more different angle than most of the time. I'm going to be talking about it from the strategic angle and from the process angle. So how do you set up the right things in place so you can follow a good governance strategy? Without further ado, let's dive in. In my mind, a good governance strategy rests on 4 different pillars. Now, strategies are different from organization to organization, and things might be called a little bit different. But in my version of it, it's set up like this, and I think it's something that you can definitely relate to and use in your own organization. So I have 4 pillars. The first one are processes, which is the backbone of a good governance strategy. Now, processes will help your users do things in the right way first time. Now, the second pillar of my Power BI strategy, governance strategy, is the training. Having a well-trained user base will help you in doing things correctly as well. So you should definitely train, your users in different ways depending on what their role is. But if you have well-trained users, it's much more unlikely that you will have an unintentional breach of governance. So monitoring is probably one of the biggest part of it, and really the only part of the strategy that is a technical thing, because you need to build up the monitoring with using technology. So monitoring will help you take everything you need to know about your Power BI environment and put the data in the right place where you can then monitor what's going on in your environment. The fourth pillar is roles. Now, in Power BI, you don't normally have many different roles. And, when I say roles here, I'm not talking about full-time employees or anything like that. I'm just saying it's hats. You want to put hats on people, because having clear roles will help you in 2 ways. First of all, it will help other users figuring out who is responsible for something specific. But it will also help those who have the role in justifying the time they use on delivering, because they are going to be doing things in Power BI, and most often it's undocumented roles that people are doing, but having the role hand on will help them justify the time they spend on it. So these are the 4 pillars I considered for a Power BI governance strategy. Now let's go on and take a look at each one of them individually and see what components each one of them has. So the first pillar of the governance strategy is processes. As I said in the beginning, then processes are the backbone of any good governance strategy. You need to have the description of how things should be done, because otherwise you are going to get things done in a lot of different ways, and it can make your implementation effort hard. I have experienced many customers that I've gone to and places I have worked where they have not thought governance into their Power BI implementation, and it becomes quite a bit of like a Wild West where everyone does things in their own way, and not only does it risk having governance breaches, but it also going to make your tenant messy, and it's going to be hard finding things, and it's going to be hard understanding what you have and what you don't have. Normally, I would break down the processes into different documents, something like development process, publishing process, sharing and security, naming standards, support, and tenant settings. But some of them might be together. For example, publishing and sharing might be one process. Even development, publishing, sharing might be one process. It depends a little bit on how big your documents are. So, and it also depends a lot on what type of users do you have. If you have users that are doing the whole thing all the time, so they're the same person who does the development of Power BI artifacts, they do the publishing, they do the sharing, they set the security, then you might want to have maybe bigger processes. But if there's different people, then you want to split them up. So I'm going to talk about each one of these processes here and talk a little bit about what it could contain and why you would want to have that as a part of your governance processes. So first of all, it's the development process. So development process is relevant for anyone that creates reports or datasets. So these are the persons that are usually in Power BI desktop, and they were going to be creating stuff. It would also often, include the description of, where you should develop content. Should you do it always in Power BI Desktop if you can, or is it okay you do it in the Power BI service? And now we'll talk a little bit about why you should do things in one place over the other. One big part of this is how and where to store the PBIX files, because you want to describe how to securely store them. Should you be stored in OneDrive for Business for version control, or should you be stored in just in the file system or a shared drive or whatever? It will also tell a little bit about when to split and report and dataset from each other, because now you can have shared datasets. So it will talk a little bit about when that does make sense. It will talk about branding information. Where do you get the theme file, and are there any templates that exist and stuff like that. And it will have references to support material, maybe internal videos, or YouTube videos, or something that exists out there that you think is good for developers to know. Now, as I said, you might have different kind of developers. You might have Power BI professionals, or people in a BI department or something like that do nothing but create Power BI stuff. And you might also have business people that occasionally or regularly create Power BI content. You might have different processes for them, because you might require your BI people to use proper source control, while you are okay with your business people just to use OneDrive for Business for version control. So the next process is the publishing process. And again, this is relevant for the same person as to the development, because usually, and that's not always, usually it's the same per people, because usually you will publish from Power BI Desktop. Now it depends a little bit on how complex your process is. If you just, if they can develop to dev, but then others will develop, they will publish to dev, but others will publish to test and production, or whatever, environments you have. So it might be a little bit different, different type of document depending on what your role is and what your complexity of your environment is. But it will usually include a description of how to set up workspaces. If you don't allow people to do it themselves, it will tell about how you can have one created for you. And it will then describe how and when to publish reports and data sets. Do you do it from Power BI Desktop? Should it be done through Azure DevOps, or something, just whatever your process is. So the next one is the sharing process. I say often they are together, but not always, because sometimes you will do the publishing yourself, but you're not allowed to share it on. And this is most often when you have multiple environments, because you're not going to be sharing anything from the dev environment. So if you have a different team that starts the sharing, then from development, this might be a split up process. So this is relevant to everyone who needs to share reports or data sets or dashboards, or to workspace managers if you have something like that. It will often include description of how you share. So there are different methods to sharing. You can do direct sharing. You can give access to workspaces. You can give access to apps. You can print, and you can sign up to a subscription. So there are all different ways. So you can do sharing. And it will describe the ones that are relevant to your organization and when to use each, so that people do not use the wrong sharing method and create an unnecessary complexity. And it will reference the security process, because there are details. When you're doing sharing, you are basically giving access. So it will reference the security process so that people will know how to give access in the correct way. And the next one is security process. And that's of course relevant to anyone who needs to share reports. It might be specific people, or it might be the same people as before. It's usually split into two categories: data security and object security. And of course, it will contain information or references on if you are GDPR compliant, or you have any kind of ISO standard or something that you need to live up to. It will contain references to those, so not only how you should do it, but maybe why it's important to do those security. So object security process. And that's relevant to anyone who wants to share reports, dashboard, or datasets, or workspace manager as before. And it will include information such as, when do you want to share secure objects? Sometimes you don't have to secure them. And if you need to secure them, how do you secure the different type of objects? So for example, Power BI Desktop file, as I said before, you want to make sure that doesn't fall into the wrong hands because it's fully open. How do you secure app workspaces or workspace apps or data sets, reports and dashboards, on-premise gateway connections? So all these different things that you can secure in Power BI, how do you secure them? You will also here have information about when to use Active Directory groups, and if you need to use Active Directory groups, how do you ask for one? How do you order one if you need to get it? Now, of course, if it's not enough just to secure the object, sometimes it is necessary to secure the data within the object. So you have a report or a data set that has data about many parts of the organization. Maybe you need to secure individual parts within that. So maybe you can say that members of this group need to have access to this organization, part of the organization, but members of this group need to have part of another part of the organization, need to have access to it, right? So if you need to secure the data, you need to know how to do that. So you would want to say that which data sources support using the data source security. So analysis services, SAP BW, there are a few of them that will allow you to use the security of the data source. If you connect to in a certain way. You will then, if that's not possible, how can you use roll-up security? And it will show, examples or point to resources about when to use, static roll-up security and when to use dynamic roll-up security. Another one that's quite important, but I actually see very seldomly, in place in the organization I go to, it's a naming standard process. And if you create reports, dashboard data sets, or you create workspaces, you will need to put a name on it. And if your organization has a corporate naming standard, that's fantastic. If you can somehow tie into that, that's great. If not, you need to write down a naming convention that makes sense for your organizations. So you will tell how to name and rename your objects, and then you also say where the corporate naming standard is. So this is very important because if you don't have a naming standard in place, you're going to have a very messy tenant where you have workspaces called all kind of different things, and reports called all kind of different things. And now you have data sets that are shared, and you have then they can go in between workspaces. So more people might see them. You have when you create an app from a workspace, now you can rename the app. Before it was always called the same as the workspace. So it can get quite messy pretty fast. So the earlier you implement some kind of a naming standard, the better it is. Now, support process is also another thing that I think is a great thing to have. If you have a support organization in your in your company, then they might be dedicated to Power BI, or they might not be dedicated to Power BI. Maybe they will do some of it, maybe they will only all of it, maybe they will do none of it. But if you have a support organization in place, people will contact them for support. They will not necessarily talk to the owner of the report because they're used to getting help through the support organization. So if you equip them with a support process, it might be just this is how you reroute it somewhere else. But it might also be, how do you solve common problems, even though you're not a Power BI specialist? And then also, how do you identify an owner of a Power BI report or a dashboard or data set or something, so you know how to route it on to the right person? So the last process is maybe it shouldn't be called a process, maybe it's just a documentation, but it's a document where you write down all the settings of your Power BI admin portal. So the tenant settings, you write down each one and every setting, what is set on, who has access to it, and all these different things for each and every one of the settings. Now, there's something like 50, 60 settings, so it's quite a bit, but you need to write all of them down, because what happens is that if you don't do that and someone changes something, so if you have more than one administrator and an administrator changes a setting in the admin portal, you will only see in the audit log that the setting changed and what it changed to, not what it changed from. So if you want to keep govern the admin portal governed, you will need to write a document saying, this is the settings and this is how this should be. This was the last of the processes. Now let's go in and look at the next pillar. The second pillar is training. From a governance perspective, training is very important because it helps your users do the right thing straight away, so you minimize the risk of governance breaches. You want to train people in the tool so they know how to use the tool properly, but you also want to train them in the governance strategy so that they know where the documents are, how to use them, and know how to access them. You want to train everyone, not just the developers, but also the consumer, administrators, everyone. But you want to find the right delivery method and the right way to do the training. So for example, with consumers, you might want to just do a series of videos. While for administrators and even developers, you want to have in-person classroom training. Find, of course, what is right for your organization, but the more closeness you have to the trainer, the more likely is that the training is well received. Another thing I want to mention is that you should consider maybe automating the training deliveries. So for example, if you have consumers, you want to make sure that they do the video series. So what you can do, a very, very simple thing you can do is that if you in the audit log see that a person uses Power BI for the first time, you can send them a link to the training material. So maybe using Microsoft Power Automate or something like that. You send them a link saying, here's the, I can see that you started using Power BI, here's the training material. You can do the same thing for developers. You can send them links to your governance material, and you can also send them, training offering or something like that. So that will help you, so you don't have to chase people down. You don't have to keep a track of who has gotten training or who's not, because you will have this process automated. The third pillar of the governance strategy is monitoring. Now, monitoring is a big part of governance, because without monitoring, how do you know if you're compliant or not? You can use monitoring to, give information out to stakeholders. You can also use monitoring to know if something is going to happen. So if you have some kind of KPIs in place, and you can go and use this for all kind of different, different projects. What I recommend that they do with monitoring when it comes to governance is that you do at least take the Power BI activity log and take that down. Now, normally it's stored in the Microsoft Security and Compliance Center in Office 365, and it's stored there for 90 days. So you need to take it out and you need to put it somewhere so you have a longer history. If you don't have access to that, you can get it through the Power BI REST API, but then you can also only get 30 days. So get started by getting the audit log out and start storing it. Just be aware of that when you're storing something like the audit logs outside of the system, you need to be aware of that there are personally identifying information in it. So just be careful how you store that. You can also, besides doing the audit log, you can also monitor or get information out about the artifact inventory. So everything you have created, everyone has created in your tenant. So all the reports and dashboards and workspaces and everything. If you combine those two, you will have a comprehensive overview of who is creating what, and you also say what are they creating and when are they creating it. So you have this combination of who and when and all that, and also what in more detail. If you start doing this, if you start taking all the data and you start putting it in a database, there's another session in this conference that I did on the monitoring, so I don't want to go into a lot of detail on this. Now, if you go and get the data, report on the results, make sure that you tell your stakeholders that you have this data and that everyone relevant can see it, and also make sure that if someone asks, you're ready to answer those tough governance questions. The fourth pillar of the Power BI governance strategy is roles. As I said a little bit in the beginning, it's important to have well-defined roles, but these roles will going to be different from organization to organizations. And a same person might have more than one role. I say, hey, I'm not talking about FTEs or anything like that. I'm just talking about that people will have a defined role. Some of the common roles are Power BI administrator, which you might be since you're watching this. Power BI gateway administrator, data steward, which is not necessarily a Power BI role, but something that is often associated with master data. Power BI auditor, Power BI supporter, or something different that is relevant to your organization. By having those roles in place, it's very easy for people to figure out who to talk to. I have an issue with the gateway. I can talk to the gateway administrator, and because the roles are named, you can see who that is. And it's also nice for the Power BI gateway administrator, which probably has another job besides it. It's not his full-time job, to justify this time he spends on it, or maybe even get some allocation for that particular one. So having the roles will help you as an organization, doing Power BI better. This concludes my session on Power BI governance. If you want to get in touch, talk about this session or anything else about data, you can feel free to get in touch with me. You have my contact information on this slide here. I'm happy to talk about data, so get in touch and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a nice day.